Shanti. So before starting the show, let's just recap. If you have any updates, latest updates on the immigration, then we can take it with the I-140 if there are not many updates.
Yeah, there's not much to talk about. There's no updates because it's been basically holiday season, and as we know, the high skilled workers bill, the ominous bill was introduced, but the high skilled worker bill was not introduced. So I guess that's the only update. So we have to wait for Biden's administration to do something about it, or for the bill to be reintroduced next year. With the new Senate and the new House. Of course, the Georgia Senate elections are very crucial, which is happening in January. And if the Democrats manage to get a majority in the Senate, then the high skilled worker bill looks promising and might get reintroduced and be passed, but we have to wait and see. So there's no update since last week.
Got it. So yeah, today our topic is going to be the follow-up of the last topic, the poem. So we are going to talk about the I-140. Could you please, tell us about what are the different categories of, I-140 filings, and then we can go to how to file and all the steps.
Right. So first thing is the I-140 is the second step in the employment-based green card process in most instances where a labor certification is required. Except with some exceptions, such as EB1 categories of multinational executives or outstanding professors, except for those EB1 categories where labor certification is not required, usually an I-140 is the second step, because the first step would be a labor cert, which we discussed last week. And the second step is filing the actual immigrant petition. So in the immigrant petition, you have to first of all show that you qualify as per the requirements in the labor cert. So in the labor cert, when you're filing the PERM, you're not really submitting any additional documentation. You're not submitting your educational documents, your experience letters, and other certifications that are mentioned in the labor, because PERM is done online. So it's during the I-140 that you actually submit. For example, if the requirement is a bachelor's plus 2 years of experience, and you have also asked for certification in some software, then what you have to do then at the I-140 stage is go through the PERM, see what the requirements are, and make sure that you submit the beneficiary's credentials. So you'll have to submit, in this case, the beneficiary's bachelor's degree with the transcripts. Make sure the bachelor's degree is, the date on the bachelor's degree is pretty much the date that it was actually issued. So it's not when the bachelor's degree was completed. That is not the date that the degree was obtained. It's the date that, and this is what USCIS has been saying for some time now. It's the date that the degree was actually issued. So sometimes a degree could be issued 5 years later, or 1 year later, or 3 years later, depending on maybe because they didn't pay the fee or to get the degree, or whatever it could be. So a provisional degree is not acceptable. You have to submit the actual bachelor's degree, a copy of it, and the transcripts of all the years, or consolidated transcripts. So if you're asking for a bachelor's in engineering, you have to submit your bachelor's of engineering degree and the transcripts. Now, the date of the degree becomes very important, especially when you do EB2 category, bachelor's plus 5 years of experience. USCIS requires that the 5 years of experience be post-baccalaureate experience. And they look at the date of the degree to make sure that you have 5 years of experience after that. And so oftentimes, the degree might have been received 3 years ago, like in 1996. They completed all the requirements towards the degree, but the degree was only issued in 1990, in 2000. So he may not have 5 years of experience post 2000. So you have to be really careful when you're asking for requirements in the labor cert and when you're submitting documents during the I-140 stage. So if you show a degree that is completed, less than 5 years ago, and you try to show experience that was obtained before the degree, especially for EB2, that case is going to get denied. So that's one important thing with reference to a bachelor's degree to keep in mind. The other important thing is an educational evaluation is always required. So you have to approach our educational credential service and ask them to give you a evaluation of the degree, especially if it's a foreign degree. For a US degree, no evaluation is required, right? The third thing about a bachelor's degree that is important is that the university has to be accredited. So if you went to a university that at the time that the degree was completed, if it was not accredited, and there are many universities that we've had that issue with, right, recently, in the last 5 years at least. And we've received denials because we've submitted a bachelor's degree from an unaccredited university, or a university that maybe was previously accredited, but when this person joined, lost its accreditation, simply because USCIS changed its rules with reference to accreditation. So these things are important to keep in mind. It has to be accredited from a public public university accredited. So there's certain requirements with reference to an accreditation of the university and the degree. And so those have to be kept in mind. In addition to that, if you have asked for 2 years of experience, you have to produce experience letters at the time of filing of the I-140. And the experience letters, for example, if you have asked for, say, experience in XYZ skills, you have to make sure that all those skills are mentioned in the experience letter, because that's the only way of showing that the person actually has experience in those XYZ skills. So the experience letter should have the start date, the end date. So you're saying bachelor's plus 2, right? So it has to show that it's 2 years of experience he has in the letter, whether it be 1 letter or 2 letters or multiple letters. So the start date and end date, the job title, the job duties, and the skill sets. And make sure that the skill sets that you mention in the PERM are there in the experience letter. And if you mention 10 skill sets, all 10 skill sets have to be in the experience letter. If you said 2 years of skill set requirement is needed, experience of 2 years in using XYZ skills is required, make sure that he has or she has a complete 2 years of experience in using those skills. And that is, again, you get that via the experience letter. Now, in some instances, and it may not be possible to get a detailed experience letter from your previous employer because you've already left and there's no one there, or maybe the company closed down, whatever it might be. So in that instance, then you should submit your whatever letter you have, or proof of employment that you have. And in addition to that, you can submit 2 affidavits. Affidavits from 2 different co-workers on stamp paper if they are in India or abroad, whatever the rules are for notarizing, for a notarized affidavit. And if they're here, then simply a notary public will do on a blank sheet of paper signed by a notary public. And the experience affidavits have to have all that information that an experience letter would have. So the affiant or the person who's signing that affidavit must state, first of all, how they know you, in what capacity do they work. Most probably, the best person to give you an affidavit would be a supervisor or manager. And they should say that, give your duties, again, your skill sets. So this is the only way you can prove skill sets now, because you don't have the experience letter. The skill sets have to be mentioned. It has to say that he worked for 2 years on XYZ skills. And those are the same list of skills that you mentioned in your PERM. So that's important with reference to experience letter. Now, there are other requirements such as certifications. So you asked for Java certification in your PERM. Then you have to make sure that you submit that certification when you're, submitting the I-140. So these are the basic, educational and experience documents that you have to submit in an I-140. In addition to those documents, you'll also have to submit, your proof of status documents. You can't file an I-140 unless you're in status. So you'll have to submit your, if you're on a H1, then your H1 approval, your pay stubs to show that you're presently working. If you're on a H4, then your I-539, whatever it might be your status, your I-94. If you're on an F1, then whatever status documents are required for an F1. So proof of status has to be submitted. Your passport copy has to be submitted. In addition to that, Ranjit, there's another thing called ability to pay, which has to be shown in an I-140. So the ability to pay is basically you're showing that the employer is either paying the prevailing wage that is mentioned on the PERM approval or has the ability to pay the prevailing wage mentioned on the PERM approval. So, for example, if your salary as per your W-2, you will submit a copy of your W-2. If your salary as per the W-2 is 75,000 and your prevailing wage is also 75,000, then you're good. You're already getting paid the prevailing wage, so the ability to pay is already established. But if, for example, your W-2 shows 75,000 and the prevailing wage that was approved in the labor cert was 125,000. So there is now a 50,000 difference. So that difference, you have to be able to show that the employer may not be paying it now to you, but he has the ability to pay it, the financial ability. And that is shown via a tax return. So you have to submit a copy of the tax return.
Prashanti Garu, sorry to interrupt you. We have a caller, Priya from Florida. Let's take the call and then we can continue with our discussion.
Sure.
Hi, Priya. Welcome to the show. You are on the air. You can ask your question.
Hi, ma'am. Good evening. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, thank you so much for the call, taking my call. So I have a situation where my I-94 is expiring in July 31st, 2021. My employer is planning to file my H1 extension. During my initial H1B, I had qualified for level 2 wage, and now with the effective OWL October 7, 2020, I qualify for level 1. Will there be any possibility for level 1 RFEs, like providing under the same role, same job duties, and same salary?
So, do you qualify for the level 1 because your wages have decreased, or is it something else?
No, like previously in 2019 to 2020, my salary was level 2, but now when they revised in 2020 to 2021,
right. Okay. I just wanted to make sure if. Right. Okay. I wanted to make sure if there's some other issue that I was missing. Okay. So based on the revised, because they revised the wages every year, based on the revised wages, you now don't qualify for level 2. You qualify only for level 1. Correct?
Yes. Exactly.
That's what you're saying.
Okay. Yes.
So level 1 wages can be used and should be used only if it is an entry level position. You can't blindly use level 1 or level 2 or whatever it is. There is a certain chart, a table that has to be filled out, and a number system that is given to each thing in the table. For example, if the job that you're doing is that of a, say, programmer analyst or software engineer or whatever it might be, then you have to go to the ONET and see what is the code for that. So just to give you a simple, I don't want to go into too much detail, but for example, for a software engineer, it's SVP 8, Specific Vocational Preparation of 8, which means that basically it's an SVP of 8, which means 2 to 4 years. The DOT code is 8, which means SVP of 2 to 4 years. I'm sorry if I'm confusing you. 2 to 4 years of education and experience. So a bachelor's is considered to be 2 years. So you're allowed to ask, in short, for a software engineer, bachelor's plus 2 years. So if the requirement for your position is bachelor's plus 2 years, as per your employer, then you have to look and see if any skill sets are required. Then if the skill sets are normal, you can just put 0 in that column. So you start off with 1 in the table, and then if your requirements are normal, you can put 0 there. And so there's a table of, the requirements versus what is considered to be normal. And so if it's not considered to be normal, then you have to add 1 point there and keep adding points. So when you add points, the default is 1, but if you add anything further to that table, then it becomes 2 or 3 or wage level 4. So that's how the USCIS will look at what wage level it's supposed to be. They will ask for a table of how the wage was calculated, right? So as long as they find that it was calculated, you submit that report in case there's an RFE, and they find that it was calculated correctly. You can use any wage, whatever. You can use a wage that as long as it's correctly calculated. So in general, wage level 1 is supposed to be for entry level. So a bachelor's plus 2 years or less than 2 years of experience, if the requirement is, then it's considered to be entry level. If you have, for example, if you're a person with 10 years of experience and you've been on a H1 for 10 years, then it seems unlikely that you would qualify for a level 1 wage. But if you just got your H1 last year, say you were a student and you just, got your H1, then it's possible that you could still qualify for a wage level 1. So it's all about justifying why it's wage level 1, tabulating it properly, calculating the wage level properly, and submitting that calculation to USCIS. So maybe 2 years ago, I know they sent a lot of RFEs on the wage levels, but most of those RFEs we were able to overcome by showing this calculation.
Ma'am, do you know what is the name of the chart that you're talking? Like, is there any specific name for that?
It's called, just go to Google and go to wage level calculation for H1s.
Okay.
Or send me an email and I'll look it up and send it to you.
Sure, ma'am. I will contact you of this. Thank you so much. That's the question that I had.